several experts and panelists be our panelists for this section. So first, I want to introduce Ms. Louisa Grieve. So Ms. Louisa Grieve is a member of the International Advisory Committee for the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China, and she is the Director of External Affairs for the Uyghur Human Rights Project. That is Louisa. And next to her is Dr. Jian Yang. So he's the president and founder of the Citizen Power Initiative for China, and he's also a research consultant for Harvard University. And next to Dr. Yang is Mr. Benedict Rogers from the United Kingdom. He is the East Asia team leader at the International Human Rights Organization, Christian Solidarity Worldwide. And he's a co-founder and deputy chair of the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission in the United Kingdom. So thank you for three distinguished panelists. So first, I will let Louisa make the presentation.
Thank you, Sean. So my task today is to tell a little bit more about the organizations active in campaigning and mobilizing action in addition to the research. So the organization Sean mentioned is the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China. It did grow out of the research of the investigators featured in the documentary that we watched earlier. David Matus, David Kilgore, Ethan Gutman, and others who were just outraged at the crimes against humanity that maybe used in an informal sense, but the outrage is happening in China, and agreed that they would get together on a voluntary basis to raise awareness and mobilize action on the parts of both governments and institutions. So that's what the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China is. The short form is ETAC. ETAC, and it currently has national committees in 5 countries. So we'd like to invite everyone who's interested to follow what those committees are doing, offer suggestions, get involved. Ben is involved in the one in the UK. It's the ETAC National Committee in the UK. I'm involved in the one in the US. There's one in Canada, one in Australia, one in New Zealand. I know there are 5. Canada, US, UK, Australia, New Zealand. And for any of you who know another place where there might be enough interest, it can just take as many as 4 or 5 people getting together and creating a committee. I think Dr. Corson, pointed out that one doctor in Israel got a law passed. So that's it's based on grassroots citizen action. The principle of being involved to take action. So that's the structure of one of the organizations that's very open to additional participation to get involved. ETAC, one of its concerns was this frustration that there had been no formally constituted body of a judicial nature, of a governmental nature. As one of our participants pointed out, why has no government investigated? So ETAC actually considered the idea of impaneling a group of distinguished independent experts with a variety of fields of expertise who would take a serious commitment of their time to take a look at the evidence and draw a conclusion about the legal matters. And again, this has been done by many independent researchers, but what about a group asked independently, that coming across independently? So this China Tribunal, for those, I certainly urge everyone to take a look at chinatribunal.com, but there were 5, eventually we ended up with 7 members who spent a year looking at the issue, of whom only 1 had really heard about the issue before, and that was the China expert in the group, Dr. Arthur Waldron, who's here at University of Pennsylvania. All the others were basically totally new to the issue, a member of the Malaysian Bar Council, Sir Jeffrey Nice, who's been mentioned already, some other international lawyers, and 1 person with medical expertise, Nicholas. And then there were 3 people who served as counsel to the tribunal. So there was an elaborate structure to create a variety of resources to draw upon, to take the time to do it properly, and to give them independence. So this coalition of basically volunteer activists considered the idea, asked some people to start up a panelist, and when Sir Geoffrey Nice agreed, suggested some potential panelists, helped give them the background, and then he pulled together the panel, and then we worked together to create a mandate. So this is the idea: to investigate, look at the evidence, and draw a conclusion about any international crimes that are committed and what any institution should do about it. And after that, it was up to the tribunal. So in that sense, it has a semi-official or semi-authoritative nature because it was people who are new to the issue. This is the 60-page summary final judgment, which was issued on July 17th. That was too long. I'm trying to be a good environmentalist, so I printed it 2 copies per page. There's also a 1-page summary of the conclusion, and I have a couple copies here for anyone who would like to see it. As was quoted before, beyond a reasonable doubt, crimes are being committed. So I will focus in terms of action on exactly the point that Jennifer Zung of Epoch Times raised. The very last paragraph of the summary judgment. Any institutions who interact in any substantial way with the PRC should now recognize that they are interacting with a criminal state, and singled out 4 actors. 1, doctors and medical institutions. 2, industry and businesses, and specifically airlines, travel companies, financial services businesses, law firms, and financial and insurance company, pharmaceutical companies, and the individual tourists who may be saving their own life at the expense of someone else's and facilitating the continuation of unethical system that's murder. And then the 3rd is educational establishments, and the 4th is arts establishments. So this is where I have my first major criticism of the tribunal, which is I believe that that's where there should have been a full list of potential actions for these organizations to take. I think, honestly speaking, maybe Ben can correct me, Ben and Jennifer and some other people in this room were actually there to hear the final judgment delivered orally at a very well-attended event in London on June 17th. I think they were absolutely exhausted. In their free time, several thousands of pages of material, 4, or I think it was 5 full days of testimony from experts, people who'd done analysis, experts in transplantation and the international law, and witnesses who talked about their horrific experiences and who could testify to the medical testing and all the other evidentiary work that goes into providing conclusion. So then it's up to us to, as Grace has properly arranged it, to talk about action. So I will give you one example. The committee, the U.S. Committee to End Transplant Abuse in China, is writing letters to medical schools across the country to ask them, have they done due diligence in their cooperation with China? We started with Cornell Medical School, I'll say openly, because Cornell Weill Medical Center in New York City, Cornell's not in New York, but the medical school is, very highly regarded hospital and teaching hospital, of course. On their website, advertised a formal memorandum of understanding to cooperate with Tai Hat, which is a private Chinese company run by a, quote, mysterious Chinese billionaire, to consult about developing a new international hospital in Shanghai. So right there, they're advertising their cooperation. And the letter said, will there be anything to do with transplants in this cooperation, training, clinical practice, consulting about design, anything. And got a letter right back, surprisingly, from the dean of the medical school saying, we're very aware of the issue of unethical sourcing of organs in China, and our cooperation will have nothing to do with transplantation. And it was a little bit longer than that, very polite letter. So, and there's therefore no need to meet. Thank you for your offer to meet with us. So our committee, for example, takes that and said, that's not enough. Wrote back very briefly, thank you for the reply. Here's the date of the forthcoming tribunal conclusion. Here are sources for other information. We hope you'll keep up with it, and we'll be back in touch. because it honestly, it's in the interest of that hospital, of course, to continue this potentially lucrative consulting agreement with this Chinese company, and there was very little recognition that you can't just take your Chinese partner's word for it, that there's nothing wrong there. You really have to dig. So that's one example. We're now, the committee of volunteers right now is in the midst of, has collected over 300 or 400 American institutions that relate to surgery, that relates to the transplantation science, and is a dozen at a time sending out the letters to them, asking them if they've done their due diligence, informing them of the issue, asking for a response. So just at that very simple level, what authority does our group have to do it? None. We simply care about the issue and we'd like to know and engage with them. I'm going to give one more example and then I'll stop. I think I'm going over my time. So what good does it do to do the awareness? And this is a little bit like Dr. Corson's example. So a member of our International Advisory Committee was contacted by a doctor in Canada who is head of the surgery department at his prestigious teaching hospital. And he was a little bit upset because the dean of his medical school had set up an entire formal memorandum of understanding, an agreement to have exchanges and training with a transplant surgery center in China. And he said, first of all, I'm the chairman of the surgery department, how come I don't know about this? And secondly, aren't there problems with China? So it prompted him to look more. He got in touch with different institutions, some of the researchers, I think doctors against forced organ harvesting as well as ETEC, and said, isn't there a problem? Should I be putting my foot down? End of the story was he put his foot down and he had to fight his dean. He said, yes, but this is a very, we need the money for this training. It's very useful to have the prestige of the international connection. But because his conscience told him, I cannot, my Hippocratic oath, the way I run my medical school, cannot stand for this. Our goal, and I think everyone's goal here should be, there should be no medical institution in Canada, no medical institution in the UK, no medical institution throughout America, or really everywhere in Europe, any advanced country that has a transplantation industry. We should all say, unless there's a true ethical procurement and allocation system, unless we know organs are coming in an acceptable way that's known to be fulfilling international ethical standards, we can't, it should fill us with horror to be working with the Chinese transplant industry in China. No individual practitioner, as good-hearted as they may be, can escape the fact that the state system is so unethical. So that's that leads me to my final criticism of the tribunal, which is that it's very lawyerly and bends over backwards only to draw conclusions that it can. It drew very strong conclusions, but it doesn't say up front, we don't have to prove or show beyond a reasonable doubt that China's reforms fail to correct its past ethical lapses. All you have to show is it's up to every medical institution and medical system to have an ethical system. It's their job to create one, and they haven't done so, and therefore no medical journal or hospital should have anything to do with it, and deny them the prestige of being part of the global medical community. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. So I want to echo actually when I read the tribunal's judgment. Also, I had a feeling when I read the suggestions, what's the detail, right? We listen so many different organizations, but what kind of specific action we can take. So next we're going to hear Mr. Rogers do your presentations.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a really great pleasure and privilege to be with you. I sort of feel, as the penultimate speaker of the day, that I'm not quite sure what more I can add to what has already been said. Partly because a lot of what has been said is what I would have said anyway, and partly because I am still a relative newcomer to this issue by comparison with a number of people in the room who are real experts on this. I started to get involved in this issue about 3 years ago. But what I thought might be helpful, particularly for those of you in the room who may also be new to the issue, and indeed for those of you who've been working on the issue for a long time, as a source of encouragement for you, just to set out two things. Firstly, how I got involved in this issue, and particularly what in the United Kingdom we have been doing in the last 3 years, and some brief reflections on where we go from here. Perhaps just as a brief bit of context, as has already been said, I work for a human rights organization called CSW, which specializes in the human rights of the freedom of religion or belief, hence the reason for being in Washington, D.C. this week for the Ministerial on Advancing Religious Freedom. And we work for freedom of religion or belief for people of all religions or beliefs and none. And so for that reason, of course, the persecution of Falun Gong, of now the Uyghurs, and the persecution of Christians and others in China is very much at the heart of our work. If we go to the next slide, one of our mottos in CSW is to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. And there is no human rights abuse, no crime that has victims who are more unable to speak for themselves than this one, because by definition they cannot do so. Next slide. As I mentioned, we've been focused certainly on the crisis in Xinjiang. The next slide, the crackdown on Christianity. And of course, it's very appropriate that we're looking at this issue this week as we approach the 20th anniversary of the persecution, the beginning of the persecution of Falun Gong. So let me just say briefly how I got into the issue of organ harvesting. I've been working on human rights in Asia for nearly 20 years, and I work on North Korea, on Burma, on religious freedom in Indonesia, and on all the other issues that I've already mentioned in the context of China. I wasn't exactly looking for another issue to take up. I thought that I had enough on my plate, but one of the organizations that I'm involved with in my spare time, in addition to CSW, is the Conservative Party's Human Rights Commission in the United Kingdom, which is a body that I helped to co-found to be a voice on international human rights within the British Conservative Party, which of course is the party in government at the moment, just about. So in 2016, we decided to hold an inquiry on human rights in China broadly. We decided to narrow it slightly to look at the period from when Xi Jinping became president of China, so from 2013 to 2016. We invited submissions of evidence. We held 3 hearings. And to be very honest, when we began the inquiry, the issue of organ harvesting was not on our agenda. I was vaguely aware of some of the reports, but it wasn't until Ethan Gutmann contacted me, having heard about the inquiry, and said, could we submit evidence? And so we invited him to come and testify at one of our hearings. If we go to the next slide, we also had Anastasia Lin, who will be familiar, I'm sure, to many of you, former Miss World Canada. It's the first time in my human rights work that I have had a Miss World testify, and she testified at one of our hearings, and we launched this report which we called The Darkest Moment. The reason for that title was it came actually from Yang Jianli's expression in his testimony to our hearing, saying that the state of human rights generally in China was the darkest moment since the Tiananmen massacre. And we launched the report in Parliament in June 2016, almost exactly 3 years ago, with the former governor of Chris Patten and Anastasia Lin and Angela Gui, the daughter of Gui Minhai, the bookseller who's detained in China still. And as a result of that, because of the evidence that we heard specifically on organ harvesting, we decided as a commission to look into it further. We were so shocked by what we heard from Ethan and from Anastasia. So we had a further specific hearing a few months later on organ harvesting. We also were able to engage senior parliamentarians, including the Speaker of the House of Commons. And if we go to the next slide, we then published our report on organ harvesting. And the next slide, that led to a number of initiatives in Parliament. First of all, the Member of Parliament who chairs the Commission, Fiona Bruce MP, together with another MP called Jim Shannon, initiated what's called an early day motion, which is the closest we have in the British Parliament to a resolution that you have in Congress. It doesn't have quite the same teeth that a resolution has, but it's a statement of the opinion of those members of Parliament who sign on to it. So we had an early day motion. We've had several early day motions since then. And if we go to the next, yes. We then had a full debate in the House of Commons, and we've since then had several others. So the issue has started to be raised in the last 3 years quite regularly. If we go to the next slide. Something else we did in Parliament to raise the issue was that around the same time as we were doing all this, Anastasia Lin had a new film coming out, some of you may be aware of it, called The Bleeding Edge, which is a dramatization of a fictional film, but one that depicts in shocking and powerful way forced organ harvesting. And so we were able to arrange, if we go to the next slide, we were able to arrange a screening of the film in Speaker's house, which is the residence of the Speaker of the House of Commons. And the Speaker, who's pictured here, himself hosted it and attended. We had many members of Parliament there. And that was a powerful way of awakening and informing members of Parliament. Since then, if we go just through the next few slides briefly, I've been writing very regularly on the issue, different op-eds as a way of waking people up in different publications. If we just hold on that previous one, one of, I think, the breakthroughs that I had was I've been writing in a number of smaller publications, still respected and reputable publications, but smaller scale. And I decided to approach the Wall Street Journal, who I'd written for on other issues, to ask if they would take a piece on organ harvesting, and they did. Many of my friends who've worked on this issue for far longer than me said that this was a real breakthrough because the Wall Street Journal had not previously covered the issue. There are copies of that article available, a few of them, around the room. If we go to the next slide, this op-ed that I co-authored with Lord Alton, who's a senior member of the British Parliament, the House of Lords, who has also now engaged very actively on this issue. And the next slide. And so then, so much has been said about the China Tribunal that I won't repeat what has been said. But when we heard those final words at the presentation of the Tribunal's judgment, which Louisa just read out, and it's worth just repeating that anyone engaging with the Chinese state should now recognize that they are interacting with a criminal state. And so I wrote an op-ed based on that. And I think Louisa said this already, but I think it's worth underlining that the value of the tribunal was that none of the tribunal members at all had any connection with Falun Gong or with organ harvesting or with any associated groups related to the issue, and only one tribunal member was himself a China expert. None of the others had any prior record of criticizing China, so they couldn't be disregarded as sort of anti-China critics. And I think that was really valuable. If we go to my next slide, the penultimate slide, and I'll just close with this and then make one final point on the final slide. I think it had already been said by the Pope that the trade in organs is immoral and is a crime against humanity, and now the China Tribunal has found that is indeed the case. And if we go to my final slide, this is to Geoffrey Nice. The only thing I will say in addition to what's already been said about the tribunal is that I have had the privilege of knowing and working with Sir Geoffrey Nice for probably 10 or more than 10 years. I've worked with him closely on North Korea and Burma. And so I was delighted when he agreed to take up this challenge and that he proposed something on the scale of a tribunal. And I think even if we have some criticisms of things they could have done or things that were not in the judgment, I think this judgment really needs to be used very widely. It's also worth mentioning that they published the summary judgment, but my understanding is they will be producing a full 200-page judgment in September. So there is more to come. I mean, it won't change the conclusion, but it will add more detail. But I think we must do everything possible to get this judgment widely known and to now get governments to respond in the ways that Louisa has outlined and ways that we may go on to discuss. Thank you very much.
Hello? Coming up?
Yes, it's on.
Hello?
Yes, it's on.
Okay, yeah, so actually immediate question, because you're very impressive, you've done so much in the last few years. So one of your op-ed mentioned about China already defined as a criminal state. So what kind of specific actions you already suggest in your op-ed? What kind of action can you take?
Well, I think, I mean, the tribunal outlined some, Louisa added others, but I think the biggest action, and this is, of course, not easy to do at all, but if it is a criminal state, then surely accountability is needed. Impunity needs to be addressed. Now, that raises the question, how do you hold a state like China accountable? How do you bring the perpetrators to justice? There are no easy answers to that, but I think the direct answer to your question is the perpetrators need to be held accountable.
So another question is, the summary conclusion was announced in the United Kingdom. Do you think the full report will be maybe formally announced in the United States to bring a bigger impact?
That's certainly my hope and the hope of others, and I and others are doing what we can to encourage that. Hopefully there'll be more news on that in due course. But yes, I think it would be very good.
Yeah, Sean, I thank you for raising that. I think there is a strong interest in doing that. Not to imply that the UK is not an important place, but to bring the attention over here now that there have been 2 full days of very big hearings with witnesses, a lot of witnesses telling their story of someone that was all in London, so to bring that across to the United States. But it will depend on co-sponsorships. As I mentioned before, the tribunal worked on a completely voluntary basis. The only money that was raised was to be able to fly some people into London for those days of hearings and for then the distribution of the announcement of the hearing, and then there aren't paper copies, it's all just on the website. So the tribunal members would need to be able to come, and then just the organizing and hosting a venue like this. So we're absolutely looking for partnerships to make that happen here in Washington.
All right, thank you.
Inviting
Thank
these
you.
partners.
All right, now, Mr. Jamie Yang. So, part of the action. So, after this panel.
Hello, everyone. I certainly have not much to add to my previous speakers, but I want to briefly share with you how we got involved with this work. We started in the year 2000, just the second year when China started persecuting Falun Gong practitioners. The so-called conferences series, the so-called Ethnic Interfaith Leadership Conference. Later it became an annual event. Each year, through this platform, we have brought younger generation leaders from different religious and ethnic groups, including Uyghurs, Tibetans, Mongolians, of course Chinese high majority, and religious groups like Falun Gong, Christians, Muslims, and even people from different regions like Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau. And many friends in this room have involved with that conference. That conference became possible with tremendous support from Louisa, who was working at National Endowment for Democracy. We got tremendous encouragement and the financial support from this organization, and Louisa was the key person there. Thank you so much. And this platform continue to help various groups to speak up about their stories. And we, in what we said, in helping those groups to speak the truth and speak truth to the general public as well as to the power, which is probably even more important. So we have to urge our government to take actions based on actions. And beside that, we also have an online publication, e-Bao. It's in Chinese language. And that e-Bao was founded in 2001. It has been 18 years. Now it has been the most widely circulated in China. We can reach almost 1 million readers in China. So we continue to publish the articles that would be otherwise impossible in China. And recently, a few international organizations approach us for their writings for us to translate into Chinese and circulate in China. So now I encourage everyone here, if you have anything you think you want to have it translated into Chinese and get circulated in China, come to us. So for this kind of report, the report that we heard today, I think we should do that. So come to us and we'll work out a plan to do that. Now we are talking about actions. Truly, the entire humanity cannot afford to continue to look the other way. And according to the experts that spoke earlier today, U.S. government, the Congress have not done enough in standing up to this modern day crime against humanity. So today, to conclude this conference, and on the eve of the 20th anniversary of China's persecution against the Falun Gong, and the 20th anniversary of Falun Gong's incredible resistance, the organizers of this conference issued a joint statement calling for actions to stop the actual traditional killing of prisoners of conscience for organ transplants in China. According to the speakers who spoke earlier today, U.S. actually is behind of Israel, for example, and some European countries, even Taiwan, who have already banned their citizens from going to China for organ transplantation from illicit sources. We think U.S. should do the same. So today, this joint statement is particularly direct at U.S. So I will not read the paragraphs that will basically repeat what the expert shared today. I just read the last paragraph to you. We call on the United States government to condemn the persecution of Falun Gong and other religious groups in China, call for an end to this most hideous of human rights disasters in the modern era, and prevent American individuals and institutions from becoming complicit in this crime against humanity. This joint statement is introduced on this day by China Organ Harvest Research Center and signed by International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China, Human Rights Law Foundation and the Citizen Power Initiative for China. This joint statement is open for signatory organizations. Whoever wants to sign on it, please let us know. Thank you.
It's probably easier with all this sit down.
I have something to add.
Yes, go ahead.
So in response to my fellow panelist, I would like to point out that the summary judgment has been translated into Chinese already, Jin Li, and by a volunteer who's actually an American, a professor at an American university. He's one of the volunteer members of the U.S. Committee to End Transplant Abuse in China. So it's an example of how an individual can make a contribution. So that is ready and we need it to be reviewed by somebody who can edit it and then we can share it with you.
We will have a 2019 report because we keep on to improve the accessibility of the report. Because in 2016, our report is 680 pages, too long for the people to access. So in 2017, we produced a short video, just 20 minutes. We have a Chinese version, so you can, you can transfer to China. And that thing, I think is a communist regime. They cannot sleep anymore. I think that everyone should know about it, right?
Yes.
And last year we published a report of 330 pages because the Chinese communist regime, the claim they have reformed. The entire international society just believe in that. We spent around 2.5 years to conduct an investigation, and we conclude it still continues. Yeah, so that's last year's report. But this year, we just finished the last pieces of the puzzle, the big puzzle for the China's organ transplant crimes. Yeah, the last puzzles. It's related to the genocide, to the beliefs groups, just like Falun Gong, Uyghur, and the others. Freedom of conscience. Yeah, we finished the last piece of the puzzle. So now I think it's the time for the entire world to learn about it, learn what happened what's happened there, and learn about the nature of the communist regime. Yeah, it's the enemy of all the human beings, humanities. Yeah, everyone should to voice out to stop it, to end this. The crime against the humanity. That's what I want to see. We have a 2019 report. It's just less than 100 pages. The main body of the report is just less than 50 pages. Yeah, it's easy for everyone to learn about it. Yeah, that's what I say. I'm very glad to have that kind of cooperation here. Yeah, we have a collaborations. Yeah.
So I think it's time actually we need to give a round of applause for Grace and the China Organ Research, Organ Harvest Research Center for so much work that have been dedicated to the organ harvesting issue in China, coming up from the report, and also hosting today's event. So I know Grace has been putting hours of time to dedicate for this panel, right? So now I want to have some further discussion. So especially Luis, you mentioned about the effort to the medical institutions, right? So from the presentation this afternoon, I just feel the trend of the expansion of the organ transplant center in China was so fast. So for ourselves, outside China, how can we curb this trend? Any efforts that we can slow down at least? We may not immediately stop it. Anyway, we can slow it down. Any suggestion? What kind of action we can take? Because we still keep expanding and we kind of slow it on action. How can we capture this pace?
Thank you very much. What a great question, Sean. It gives me a chance to say, what is the purpose of our community of those concerned, or asking governments to force American, let's say Canadian, American, UK, European medical institutions to refuse entry to those Chinese transplant surgeons, right? You can't publish your journals, you can't come and do your postdoc or your residency or any kind of short-term deny them prestige, you are really, at least you're denied your prestige. And the other part is denying money. So if they can't have prestigious appointments, prestigious training sessions, then they may somehow, lose out against other international medical practitioners for consulting fees, whatever it is. So that's much more minor. I mean, to get a little bit at, to bring down the money, of course the major money comes up from the actual operations, and the operations, I don't think can be slowed down. But that's the theory behind, it's not only to keep to preserve the system of medical ethics, that if you have an ethical system, you can't just say, it works for us, but we don't care about ethics as long as it's China, because we want to be, somehow our medical school wants to be involved in China because it's China and everyone's involved in China. One, we want to preserve the ethics. Two, we want to deny them their prestige with the hope that that somehow changes the calculation and may, dissuade some people from doing these operations in China.
So for those surgeons who already got their training in medical institution in the United States, is there any way we can rescind the training certificate?
There you go.
Yeah, another thing we can do here to encourage people back in China to provide evidence. We can collect evidence about who is directly responsible for some particular cases. Then we can apply some mechanisms here, such as Magnitsky Accountability Act, to put these individuals on the punishments list. That's something we can do. Another thing I want to emphasize is the family members of the prisoners will play very, very important role. I was in prison for 5 years. I know those whose family members care less would be more dangerous for them. So we have to let the people back in China to understand what's going on. Tell you the truth, when I was first out of prison, when I first heard this story, I didn't believe it, because it's beyond my belief. It's too huge, too brutal for me to believe it. But later, when I saw more, I read more reports, and some things coincide with my experience in prison. For example, first, all the prisoners would have very good medical treatment to get all the biological data. They keep a very good data bank for blood, for everything. And I was wondering why they treat me so well. We are prisoners, it's non-human being, but why they did that? They did that on a regular basis. Now I understand why they did that. And another thing I didn't quite understand why I was in prison, that was, many criminals receive the death penalty. But the waiting time for each individual is largely different. And from one case to another, there's no pattern to follow. I didn't understand why. I asked fellow prisoners why. Nobody could answer me. Now I understand why. They have to wait for match. So there is no pattern. There should be pattern, right? So a lot of things just corresponding to the report. Now I'm convinced. So I said this because I want you to understand how important to get the evidences report back to China. Not only educate American general public, but also China general public, so that every family, if any of their family members happen to be in prison, they have to be careful. They have to pay a close attention to this issue, especially Falun Gong practitioners who happen to be prisoners. Their family will play very, very important role. A lot of prisoners receive more severe torture because there's no family members care what they're doing in prison. So that's something we can do.
Dr. Yang brought a very, very good point, how people inside China can also help stop this trend, and the education of inside and outside, how to work together, that's very, very important.
Can I just add?
Yes.
Just very briefly, just to add, I agree entirely with those two last points. I just want to add two other points that I think we should be looking at. The first is we've already talked about those countries that have banned their citizens from going to China. We should be encouraging more countries to implement legislation to do that, because if you deny them the prestige, as Louisa said, if you educate people in China as to the evidence, as Yang Jianli has said, and at the same time you do your best to deny them the market, the money, then that will help begin to stop or at least slow the process. And then the other thing that I think we should also be doing is increasingly exploring mechanisms for accountability and talking about the criminality of the Chinese state for two reasons. I mean, the first is, we all know, of course, that it's going to be extremely difficult to actually get a prosecution in any of the international institutions for that purpose. But even just talking about a prosecution may scare people in the Chinese regime. I mean, Xi Jinping was scared by being compared with Winnie the Pooh. So if we keep talking about him as a criminal and his regime as a criminal state, that may have some effect. And related to that, people in Britain and Europe, maybe it's less so in the United States, but certainly in Britain and Europe, people use the argument that what can we as one country, Britain or France or Germany, do against such a huge power like China? And there may be some truth to that, but I think if like-minded countries work together much more, the United States, the European Union, Britain, Canada, Australia, and really speak with one voice and start talking about accountability for criminality, that may have some effect.
Yeah, we have to build a human rights NATO.
That's a good name, yeah. Actually, so I just received a press release from the State Department that mentioned that Vice President Pence is going to make a statement on Thursday saying international religious freedom will be a key United States foreign policies priority and issues. Yeah. So just wondering, in UK, is there anything similar efforts to treat this human religious freedom as a very top foreign policy issue?
Very much so. It's actually really timely that the Ministerial is happening this week, because religious freedom was declared a priority for the British government several years ago, but just last week the British government, or an independent inquiry that was set up by the British Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt, specifically into the persecution of Christians, which I know is a separate topic, but is still relevant to what we're thinking about. They published their report last week, and the British government has a major focus on religious freedom and currently on the persecution of Christians. So yes, I think there's a growing alignment and collaboration between the United States, the British government, and indeed other European governments that have special envoys for religious freedom. And it's worth mentioning, I don't know if our friends from Taiwan are still here, but Taiwan recently appointed a special envoy for religious freedom. So increasingly more and more governments are looking at this.
So another question is, the Israel's legislation to stop the organ tourism in China was very encouraging. So in UK, in the United States, how do we try similar efforts? And also in the United States, and anyway, the Department of Health and Human Services can actually involve in this process, because like Louisa, you reach out to so many medical institutions, right? They may not respond, or maybe respond just like lip service, but anyway, the DHS can really engage.
Actually, Louisa had a very good idea. Just like this morning, she shared with us. She has launched a petition. The petition to the medical institutions, to the professors, to the deans, to the principals, and just we expand today's joint statement. We can launch a petition and to increase more awareness at least, yeah. And another, I want to share a story, a very recent story, very encouraging story. Just last week, there's a girl from Germany. She contacted with us through our info at our website, sent us the information. She said she heard about our stories from Dr. Evertorti, and Evertorti gave her our website. And that girl with our website and watched the video, medical genocide. She was touched. She said her life had been changed. And then we started to outreach the politicians, the medias. I just want to show the power of the citizens, the initiative of the citizens. Yeah, as an individual, you can change. You can make things that change. And today, this girl, actually last week, she asked me what she can do. When her learn we have this event, she said, I'm in Germany. How can we support you? Your event in Washington, D.C. I said, that's okay. We have a media package. And we gave a media package to her. And then she reached out a medical journal and bring the package to the editor. The editor at the beginning say, just like today, from agreeing to publish our press release in the journal, the medical journal. And he write comments here. It's incredible, almost shocking, but it looks like true. So they published the press release, and today this girl tell me, Grace, there's a counter, it's a cross counter, and that press release will be published, already can be published. It's our our noon. 12 o'clock, they have published it. Yeah, I just showed that story.
Very good, very good.
Yeah, just within 1 week. Yeah, we have that.
Any response regarding the legislation issue I asked? Any way to get DHSS engaged?
Right, well, we should definitely applaud the initiatives, the citizen initiatives, but there's also a bandwidth limit, how much volunteers. So if there's any other volunteers who want to work on getting in touch with DHS, that would be great. Our decision was simply to go ahead and go directly to the institutions.
That's very good.
But others, that's another segment of the project that our committee hasn't gotten to, but we would absolutely welcome anyone else who wanted to do that. And in terms of legislation, you really need a champion in Congress. So, basically, keep going with the awareness raising, and you never know when the next, Chris Smith or Rohrabacher or someone will come along and say yes. And they're actually, does everyone know that Congress just introduced a resolution on a bill condemning the persecution of the Falun Gong? That was just yesterday.
In the Senate.
On Friday in the Senate. Yeah, so that can be a joint resolution, which is again just a statement, but it's there. It's a live issue. In terms of banning, I will say that the U.S. already has in place a law denying visas to anyone who's been involved in any kind of illegal organ trade, which has been in place for a long time, and it's sort of the
U.S. question.
Right, it's a question in your visa application, which I don't know, the origin is a little bit lost in history, or maybe you know it. So at least that's there. So even one step beyond new legislation is to increase awareness of that, offer training packets to the consular officers, and to ask people, tell me about your answer to this. Because as you know, many people who apply for visas to the U.S., it's very hard to visit the U.S. actually. Sorry to all our foreign visitors, because you have to have an interview in many places. So why not have that question, that interview include that question? So there are things to take advantage of existing law before having to pass new law.
Okay, I think we'll probably close our panel right now. It's just exactly 1 hour as we planned. All right, thank you everyone. Thank you for taking the long afternoon to forgot to introduce myself. My name is Sean Hay. I'm the director of the committee.